Hi, y'all be, man. My fellow hairless makes of the blue say, it's me, we back. Contain the hype, keep it concise. We got a lot to talk about. Probably be talking a couple of times today, hopefully. Obviously, my schedule has been a little weird, but you guys know the bigger chapters, just like chapter 1000, chapter 1010, and even back to chapter 957. These bigger chapters, it takes me a few days before you hear from me. It's one of the few times where I really like to wait before talking because I like to reread by myself and chat with a few people. And sometimes, most of the time, I don't wait for the rest of the community. But this is one of those I wanted to wait, and I really wanted to viz. So I didn't have time to do this last night or Monday night, or Sunday night. But let's jump into it. Right, chapter 1043, aka possibly Juicy. You know me. You know we're gonna get into that. Um, we knew from the time that Derby had Cypher Pole guy got his order to, eliminate Luffy and him saying that's impossible. And the correlation with the Odin thing, like, right, we call that way, it was kind of obvious. But the way it was done was so dope. It was just like, I didn't even care. You know what I mean? But it just was, we weren't sure if Kaido was using Future Sight or not at that time, and did this event take place or not. That was just the thing, right? We were trying to figure out, and turns out, no, this is really happening. My man, oh no, my man, what clap Kaido, cause this what, and you're done, son. With an exclamation point on that, boy. We've been saying for a minute about the despair of Kaido, right? Not the people of Wano. The despair for them has always been there. But for our crew and the opposing forces to one Mr. Land, Sea, and Air, if it's a 1v1 bet on V, Brock Lesnar, Haijuku, no Kaido. He didn't give everybody the work out here, man, including Big Mom. All screen, however you want to put it. That was just their warm up handshake, like LeBron before the game. Well, however you want to put it, that's fine and dandy. Everybody caught the smoke. Luffy got clapped multiple times, right? Kid got clapped multiple times. Like the first time he got clapped, we didn't even see that, but we just know he got thrashed, right? Probably the same with Apu. Probably didn't even fight back. Maybe Hawkins didn't fight back either, but we know Killer and Kid did. That just wasn't gonna go out like that, right? Law got clapped by Thunder Bagwell. Ashura did what it was supposed to do, but it wasn't enough for one clap, man. We've been saying that, right? Like I said before, the vibe that you get from him when he's taking things seriously is what should have happened in the beginning, but then we wouldn't have no story, right? And Kaido's kind of dramatic anyway, so he's into this. Like he's a wrestler at heart when it comes to like selling the fight, right? He's out here with tickets and everything, like we joke about it, Nail on the Moon. They definitely watched this fight from there. There's no way they didn't, right? And then the what's been interesting about like this whole thing with him not taking fight seriously, and it's just been based on who he's dealing with and his attitude towards them. That's really what it comes down to, because he could have killed Yamato like we talked about a long time ago, and he just chose not to. So it wasn't like oh man, Yamato's too strong. No, we've been saying it, right? Besides Big Mamu, there was no character on this entire continent of Wano, because we're just gonna call it a continent at this point. Um, Nobody here was as strong as Odin. They probably was close, like Luffy or Zoro or somebody like that was probably close. Yamato was probably close, but it's more of a familiarity with her abilities and fighting him from years and years and years. So it's just like she kind of already, they have a script at this point. It's like playing somebody in your own division, like it's just like a Patriots Dolphins thing in this aspect. But it just wasn't going down, and we're seeing like regardless of who you are, he has the raw strength to KO anybody in the series. Period. At any time. right? If you're caught off guard, it already can get you slept. But you can't get caught off guard by the strongest dude in the verse. You can't have that happen. You're definitely going to sleep. It's just, and he literally dies, right? He dies. He actually dies. And there's been hints about that, and we've talked about that off and on, right? Spiritualisms in series, not just manga, but in series in general. Death, and even like Kaido's comments about death completing people, right, and things of that nature. We've talked about that before, and those symbolisms are in their religion, they're in mythology, like they're in human history. So, these, regardless of what you think of some of these things, yes, they're very tropish, some of them, right? It just depends on what is the execution. Like most things, it's really hard to tell any story a new way. Humans have just been around for way too long at this point. So most of the time it's about execution and whatever your preferences are, right? So this has been talked about, the child of destiny, right? Fate, inherent will, all these concepts are nothing new to us in the community. And some of us, even before we knew about communities and talk to other people, we already had these questions, because the more you read into a series, the more you look at it different. Not necessarily in a bad way. You're just like, oh, this is what's really going on. When you get over the hype of what character is doing what, and you just get down to the concept of what is actually going on right now with the story. What are we being told? What is he trying to tell us? Right? And we get hits all the time. So him dying here is not that crazy because we just seen it with Zoro, and they have been very, um, they've mirrored each other in this arc. If you think about when Zoro was knocked out, it was the same time as Luffy. They got up at the exact same time, pretty much, and restarted their next fight at the very same time. And then we had Zoro dying first, and then because of the situation with the Shinigami that we made jokes, and it wasn't even my idea. You guys came up with the Brook thing, but I had attributed to something like swordsmen in general, regardless of what series you're doing. They're very recognizable in a Bleach sense because humans in real life portray that concept, right? Being one with the sword and your soul and things of that nature, right? Even in things that aren't weapons, people have that. Like, think about Hunter x Hunter, right? Your ability is literally directly identified by who you are and what you think. And in One Piece, it's very similar. People don't necessarily use their abilities one for one, even like how we, the reader, think they should. But they're different people. It's just like real life. You can have any fruit you want, and so can I. There's some moves we're going to come up with the same, but clearly because of your experiences in life, even on a day to day, it's very crazy to me that I never came to the conclusion. We'll get to that. But anyway, I'm getting to, you see, I've been waiting to talk to y'all for a minute. He gets knocked out and dies. And of course, just like Nen, getting stronger in death, this concept is not nothing new. Even Native Americans talked about it. There's plenty. You go online for any length of time, right? You go through the first 10 to 12 searches, you're going to find various cultures where this is brought up. So it's just like, it's kind of cool, man, to see it used in this way. It's just a matter of, are we going to get Hichigo or Kurama? I know people ain't excited about that. Which, it makes sense for you to come to that conclusion to be worried about something like that. But it's just like this dude been telling the same story for so long. He's seen his own peers and what happened with how they executed those things. So it's not like this dude is unaware of this stuff. It's just sometimes he don't care and he's just gonna do what he wants to do because it's his story. And I think that's exactly how it should be done. So when we get moments like these where it's just like, yo, this is beyond, um, it's beyond what I was thinking. Because I didn't see him dying. Like I joked about that a couple of chapters ago before it happened, but then he literally just died right now. And who's the first two people that realized this? Momo and of course the Trafalgar Lee of all people, which that opens up a whole new discussion with him in general, right? Being able to hear the voice. And for me, anything dealing with loss, for me, it goes all the way back to Marineford. And as far as how long has he been thinking about whatever he's thinking about, and how long has he known the things that he's known? He had access to a lot of information before he was even a Shichibukai. Just being under Dofi and going through those routes, and then with Corazon and just the different things that went on with Law gave him access to a lot of stuff where it does look funny at times. Not in a bad guy way, but it's just like, man, what is he really on? Because again, when Luffy dies, Kaido doesn't even say anything. He actually, it's not like he never seen Gear 4. The only thing that confused him was the trajectory thing, which I'll get into that because we're going to talk about the Devil Fruit part last. Just because I've talked about that so many times over the years, right? Even on this channel about, like I was just telling you, the most useless Devil Fruit. What I talk about. Uh, the fact that he didn't mention anything is odd. And compared to the other two times, he knew Luffy wasn't dead. I've seen people bring this up, and I'm like, okay, cool. We're all on the same page. Like, I'm not crazy. Um, it just was weird to me why he didn't address it. He just looked up. We were tripping out last chapter about him holding his mouth in, talking about, having his hands over his mouth, talking about not letting his power escape. When that was already odd because things have been getting weird, and of course you have the cover of 1039 and a few other covers and a couple that I'll talk about tomorrow that nobody's even brought up. Probably not necessarily because they're necessarily relevant, but it ties into this, and it's really crazy when you see how long he's been thinking about this stuff. And I'll talk about a few people's videos that I saw. You guys know I be in other people's live streams. We talk in other places like Discord, right? Most of you I've been talking to the past few days. But the fact that he dies, and it's just like, well, if he's dead, then Zoro died. Zoro died first. That sounds so petty. I don't mean to say it like that. I'm just saying we've seen this happen before it happened with Luffy. This is my point. And the introduction of the Shinigami and that whole situation, even the jokes I made about Kuina, because under the Shinigami's cloak, it did look like stairs, right? That whole thing. And two of the characters that we are introduced to in this arc, that their art style and drawing, if you notice in the series, outside of actual gags and jokes, anytime we've seen something drawn and it looks totally different than even One Piece standards, it's been important, right? Like even the Sun God Nikan, I think back in Skypiea, his design looks so much different than everything else in the story. We found out that was actually kind of important, right? And then if you see with King, right, and the Lunarians, which I'm sure that ties to Joy Boy too in some way, right? His design, like we made the jokes about him, straight out of Waco Mundo, right? His design is totally different. The things that connect into the story are totally different as far as their importance. And why that panel was Zoro, I didn't come up with the idea, Brooke. You guys came up with that, which was pretty cool and it was funny. But I wasn't even thinking that because I was just stuck in a serious mode with that because, again, we had never seen anything drawn like that in the entire series. Like, even in a place like Thurl Park where you would expect to see that, the closest we've gotten to that is with Brooke through Soul Parade and some of the weird stuff he was doing during the time skip. But we've never seen anything that looked like that. It looked like it was from a different series. So the impact now is kind of cool seeing it through Luffy first, where Zoro may have a different experience. And we don't even know what Luffy's going through yet. I mean, we're going to find out. But again, if you look at the end of the chapter, how he's drawn is totally different than how most of the series looks. With the exception of Whole Cake Island in Luffy's case. But that's just because we know a trouble exists from Dressrosa, and I'm going to get to that because I've brought that up so many times over the years, and Katakuri himself. So, these designs, anytime a character's design change, you know it's serious business. And how long he's waited to do this. And something that I'll get to that. But him dying is just wild to me. It really is. Not like in a shocking way. Just what is that experience going to be like when we see what that's about? Because I remember, I think it was during Thriller Bark or Impelled Down, there was a reference to the River Styx. I mean, we know most of the story is based on real life events or names and things of that nature. But the River Styx was brought up. And then you had the Cerberus in Thriller Bark. I'm almost certain that the River Styx reference, I think it's from Greek mythology, that was during Thriller Bark. But that's kind of the vibe I like. That would have been the area in the story to bring in Shinigami, right? But it didn't happen. And then in a place like Wano, where the theme of death and life and Joy Boy, like Joy Boy here, like I don't care how many times we've said that joke over the past 5 days. I don't care. 4 days. I don't care. It's still funny to me. But over those time periods where we had these instances where we've had the design changes or a concept change for something has had a heavy impact on the series. And again, like I've talked about this before, anytime change is actually discussed in the story, change has occurred. And anytime we've seen a change in an environment or a concept or a person, the story has changed. This is going to change a lot. One, because it ties in Joy Boy for one, but two, Awakening, like I said before. You guys know I've been on they were talking about Toki's fruit, not his. I'd been on that. I was still on that. Like, we acknowledged, right, why it could be the Gomu Gomu, obviously. But that just wasn't my pick, and Toki's just seemed more to fit. Even though context would tell you Luffy, right? We talked about this before. He's been the Joy Boy candidate for longer than some of you have even been on YouTube. So this is not like some foreign concept to me. It's just sometimes whatever you think, that's what you go with. Like, yeah, I don't care about being right or wrong. It's just fun to do, right? But it turns out it is him. So now that we've seen that, and again, Momo recognizing the voice makes sense based on his ability, and we know he's going to tie to the Poneglyphs later because of the situation with the Well Tree, Roger, and Odin. The information that you get from the voice of all things being slightly different than the written text on the Poneglyphs, right? That important detail to me had always stuck out. So now that we're introducing him into the story, and you see, and I've noticed this, that a lot of people aren't really paying attention um, to the realm of the voice of all things. Like, this is kind of, it seems like a precursor to that. Because why would voice be so important now all of a sudden? And if you think about the contrast of this chapter, right, Momo hearing makes sense. He's been on Psychic Friends Network with Luffy for a few chapters now. And from the last time he, excuse me, from the last time he got knocked out, messing around with, oh, no. This time around, we first have Momo. Again, Kaido says nothing. All he does is give Derby Hat Cypher Pole guy RIP, maybe, right? The Barry Bonds treatment. The old Fred Flintstone, one of them, Captain Caveman. So he gave him one of those. But he never mentioned anything about Luffy at all. He made a statement after the last two times, right? When he first one clapped him, what did he say? Why are you glaring at me and making remarks about that? What kind of king you say you was going to be? Like, that whole thing. The second time, he sat there like, man, I probably should have decapitated this guy. Implying that he had an idea that he was not dead. And I've seen people talking about that. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one noticing that part. So this time around, he says Luffy is dead, but it's just like, man, you've seen Gear 4th enough. The fact that when the steam came out of his mouth, or the power, whatever mass of fluid that is, he watched it went into the sky. So he might know something that we're getting ready to learn anyway. He just probably was not anticipating it coming back. So it does lead to open questions about how much about Joy Boy does he really know compared to what we thought before, because he went about his business like there was going to be no repercussions from this. So that, to me, it just says he didn't expect Luffy to come back. But when you think about the statement, death completing people, again, this is another thing that I've seen other people bring up too. And I'm like, yes, see, some of these statements from Kaido we've been piecing together over the entire arc in his introduction. They're slowly piecing together, and I appreciate it. And I also appreciate the fact that most of his flashbacks have been through other characters and not him, implying that when they are through him, the level, the amount of lore and hype and importance is going to play a role. Is going to be, if you think back to those interviews when he was talking about, I bring this up from time to time, not spoiling the end of the series. Like, it could be really easy to do in Wano, and then the more we see, it's more understandable now. Like, even with Laugh Tale didn't feel that spoily at all. It just raised more questions. But when you think about some of these conversations again, we don't know the time period between Shanks and the Girl Six conversation and what happened now. But for Zanisha to show up and then this happened and then now we get resurrection, it's very strange. I can't explain it. Like, and I know the new theories about the resin fruit. That's dope to me. How it's put together. And the son's been a technician off and on throughout the years and have used epoxies and resins multiple times. I have no idea why that never occurred to me. I was so stuck on the fact that you guys know how I am. I've talked about Luffy's abilities forever and him not utilizing stickiness. And I knew it was going to come up. I knew it. We've been taught, like I said, now I have more audio that you can go back years ago and you're like, oh, yeah, you were talking about that. Not like it's a brag, but it's just that's how much I pay attention in detail. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I remember it was during my second or third reread. Um, no, yeah, somewhere around that time, we were in Whole Cake Island when we first met Katakuri, and we seen how he moved around. It just was really, and I couldn't remember why it was weird to me. And I was rereading for a different reason when I ran into. I was looking for Dofi's statement on like the how you use your ability and the SBS where Oda was talking about how the strength of a character and their devil fruit don't necessarily have to be one for one. They could get stronger in either or, and it's. I find those statements like that always kind of cool. But I noticed with Treble, right, the boy Treble, that when he talked about Luffy said something like, "Oh, you're goopy," and Treble said, "No, I'm sticky," because he was talking about how he was using hockey and it didn't work, right? And his whole substance, and then again, after he used Snake Man and he got hit by Buzzcut Mochi with the goat himself, Go to Curry, you know, the Duke of Donuts, him being sticky was why he got hit. He couldn't pull himself away. He wasn't strong and he couldn't do anything about it. So I was like, oh, you guys know this. If for this to be in back to back arcs, it's going to pop up again at some point. I just don't know how or why he would want to do that, right? I wasn't thinking of I was just thinking of the context of if he kept in the steam from Gear Second, he could heat his body, like overheat his body to change the consistency of his rubber, and he would be able to be sticky. We made the joke about the sticky hand toy from the grocery store and stuff like that. And so when I seen the gloop, like I immediately thought about that panel because he did look kind of goopy, but we know you have bouncing and stretching, which he's always been doing, and stickiness was the one thing he wasn't doing. So even in the context of a non-emotional attack, uh, fundamental of Red Hawk, rubber still made sense to me for him to be able to do that based on that kind of concept involving Gear Second. It was just odd to me that, like during when Blackbeard slammed him in the ground, that was the first time Luffy coughed up blood before. So we've never actually seen him bleed other than being cut or scratched. He had never bled from internal damage before we were spitting up blood. And it kind of tied into this. We know everything in the series is never going to be explained. No series ever does, right? It's left to interpretation, so you can have fun with it. But part of the pocket dimension theory, right, with Caribou, Blackbeard, Capone, where we see that there's some weird barrier in Devil Fruit people, some weird barrier that once you cross, something happens. And I always thought it was odd because if he's supposed to be rubber, like that's why he kind of like I don't know, it's just weird. Like even especially now after this chapter, if you go back and look at the Black Bear fight, because I did a day or two ago, and not that it wasn't really a fight, but when he threw Luffy into the ground, when Luffy says blood, that means like I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like if you go back when he slammed him on the ground, Luffy immediately jumped back up, and that's when he dashed backwards and he felt the top of his head and he said blood. Like he would be confused by blood coming out of his body. So it's one, this might be possible that he's always known that this is the resurrected fruit. And two, does this like he just been saying Gomu Gomu because that's the closest thing he think of. Like he wouldn't know a word like resin. So that part kind of makes sense, but it would clash with the devil fruit thing. I don't know, it's just weird. But anyway, not to get sidetracked, but the concept of Red Hawk from a non-emotional made sense, and it's just like, well, if he's resin, it makes even more sense. And again, as someone that has worked with resin off and on in the years, I don't know why I didn't think of resin. It's really simple, but it was dope what people have put together. Some of this stuff has been talked about before, even before Chapter 1039, which I had brought up. I'm like, well, if you look under the substance itself, it's under Usopp, and Usopp is the one who's sweating. So I don't know if that also meant something else too, because he was, he's a scary character to begin with. It was just weird, right? And then, people have talked about this, but the connection between 1043, the Juicy Juicy No Me, and the resin, that was clean, man. That's the type of stuff I'd be on. I was just like, that was clean. Like, I don't even care if it's right or not. I just thought it was really dope and it made sense, like for the substance. Because if you go back to my videos where I talk about this, I talk about what substance you are matters. We just don't know how much yet. And again, the paralogia thing, him moving funny like Katakuri or something of that nature, and how being awakened changes the natural state of your devil fruit. Like, look at somebody like Dofi, right? Even though he's a producer, he can use his strings on clouds, which that kind of doesn't make sense, but him, like, because he's interacting with air and stuff in an environment that, contrary for the substance of string, even if you're taking the goofiness, and you're not really supposed to think hard about it, it doesn't make sense in the context of the series compared to other characters, right? Again, characters that change temperature of things make sense to interact with something like a gas, like air, but something like Python or Culver and Hydra, it never made sense to me. You guys know that. And I used to think the awakening part was him bouncing his arms off of air. And it's like, honestly, the way that we think that he flies might not even be correct because Luffy's not a physicist, so he wouldn't know anyway. It still makes sense in the context of Skywalker and Soru, but he actually could have been bouncing off of air this whole time. We just didn't realize that. We just took it for what Luffy was saying. Um, and it still made sense to me. I don't even think, it's just wild right now. It's wild with what he's gonna do, because you remember the things about Blackbeard and him fighting Blackbeard later, the Gura Gura, like, the Goma Goma was a nice counter for it, and him not being able to touch Blackbeard. That's where Rio and Conqueror's Coding comes in. Him being resin, I don't think it changes any of that. If anything, it just leaves more room for crazier attacks and utilization, because there's more than devil fruits than just combat, right? So far, every fruit have had something that's not like food based, right? But the other substances, again, we're back to the substance, like crocodile being sand or a kind of being magma. I've brought this up in videos before. How does resin come into play? No, I've seen some of the stuff that makes sense, ties to sap and all that, and it is funny. And what Brago talked about yesterday, that really tied something together to me in clarity when it comes to the resin part, because the Otis favorite scene thing, and we had talked about that before, like the SBS, stuff outside of the story having an effect on the story, especially cover chapters. You guys know I've literally made a 30-minute video just talking about cover chapters, right? And the same guy who was telling you about 957 before 957 happened without even knowing it, because of cover chapters and stuff like that. Like, just, he's been doing this the whole series. Sometimes it's accident, sometimes it's for us to go, and find and like a treasure hunt. Like, he treats that stuff in the series like a treasure hunt because it's supposed to be fun. I didn't think it would be done this way though. And I didn't know what would be the next. Again, why is this necessary? And if you think about how water plays into the series, that's the only thing you can kind of tie in. And the scene that he used in his video yesterday, shout out to him, of course, um, with the mangrove trees, right, producing the bubbles. That was really dope, and it made everything make so much sense about other stuff that I've been saying, right, about the goopiness and the whole stickiness thing. And it's just like, whoa, that'll fry your brain. Just thinking about him. We haven't even talked about the real deal in this whole situation. It's not just him awakening his ability, but what is it supposed to bring? Because we think about the positive aspects of how Joy Boy is perceived, but I'm sure there's negative aspects to him too. And if there's been more than one person that held this title, depending on who was the last version, like what that person was like when they held that title, it really changes things. Because why would Kyle think he could be Joy Boy when he has no problem oppressing people? From our understanding, Joy Boy was the type of person to free people and put them out of their misery. So if he's in a foreign character, wouldn't he think Joy Boy would be disappointed by his behavior? But he's still doing it anyway. And him trying to die makes sense now in the context of, if this is how this works, where you have to die, there is no exceptions, right? Like, even Ahsoka knew, like, oh, I can't even try to catch the 1v1 without Crollo. I need to die first. Like, that's how dope Crollo is. No, I'm just, but you get my point where, this just wild. And Law makes it wild too, hearing the voice. Again, tying back, it can't be a coincidence that Law heard this voice when, again, how did he know when to come to Marineford? Did he hear Luffy's voice before? He's never mentioned anything like this before. Like, he's never mentioned any, but he's Law. He's more like me, where I'm not, you would never know what my ability is until it's already too late. Like, you're not going to talk about it, but it is just really crazy to me because what did he do to Big Mom? That's the part I see other people. I don't think like to me it has to be a time, because if he's the resin fruit, then the emotional tie of Red Hawk, again, whether he's rubber or resin, you could use that ability to make it make sense. So that means you don't need to apply an emotional aspect for Law to be able to use the silent bubble that he used to take Big Mom's voice away, which is really crazy now with this chapter and what we're going to learn from voice, because it seems to be a precursor again to the voice of all things, which is how you interact with the Poneglyphs and who else knows what. Again, a lot of these devil fruits are used for something else besides combat, that tie to things that you need, like laws, right? His can't be the only one. And we're going to get into that crazy stuff because of some of the stuff that with devil fruits and theories that still science has a ability to want to recreate what already occurs naturally. So if you think about SAD and apply that to humans, it makes sense. So we'll talk a little bit about that too, but we just wanted to chat it up about 143 a little bit, and we might be back tomorrow, maybe even tonight, because we just scratched the surface on the Joy Boy. I didn't even mention Scotty P or any of that stuff, because you can't mention that stuff by itself. Like, it's its own thing. And there's enough people talking about it right now, and we've been talking about it for the past few days. So I just wanted to get back with y'all, and we got a lot more. This is a crazy time, and I'm so glad that this is where we're at, man. Y'all be safe, man. Come back here tomorrow. Peace.